Arrogant billionaire refuses to stand for black judge. What happens next shocked everyone. The courtroom was heavy with tension, the kind that seeped into the bones of every person present. The air was thick, almost suffocating, as reporters, lawyers, and spectators sat in rigid silence, waiting for the moment that would decide the fate of one of the most powerful men in America. Judge Maya Carter strode into the courtroom with quiet authority, her every move under scrutiny. Young but unshakable, she had built her career on integrity, and now, as the first black woman to preside over a case of this magnitude, the world watched, waiting to see if she would break under pressure. But Maya Carter did not bend. "All rise," the bailiff's voice rang out, firm and authoritative. The courtroom obeyed as one. Lawyers, clerks, spectators, everyone pushed back their chairs and stood in respect. The shuffle of movement filled the space, a collective acknowledgement of the authority of the court. Everyone, except one man. At the center of it all sat Brandon Cole, billionaire, financial tycoon, and master manipulator. He had built his empire on lies, bribery, and ruthless business tactics. He owned politicians, controlled industries, and had crushed anyone who dared to stand in his way. And yet, despite the mountain of evidence against him, fraud, insider trading, and corruption, he sat in his leather chair like a king on a throne, exuding the arrogance of a man who believed himself untouchable. Brandon Cole remained seated, arms crossed, his lips curled into a smug smirk. The defiance was deliberate. He knew exactly what he was doing. Maya's gaze locked onto him, unreadable, her face a mask of control. She had seen power plays before, had watched men like him use arrogance as a weapon. But this was different. This was a direct challenge and a calculated insult. "Mr. Cole," she said, her voice steady but firm, "in my courtroom, everyone stands." Cole let out a small chuckle, shaking his head as if she had said something amusing. Then he leaned back in his chair, making a show of his defiance. "Not today," he said lazily, his voice dripping with mockery. "Not for you." Gasps rippled through the room. A murmur of disbelief swept across the audience. Even the seasoned attorneys exchanged uneasy glances. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every detail. The flicker of amusement in Cole's eyes, the slight lift of his chin as he looked at the judge, not with respect, but with condescension. Maya didn't react, not immediately. She simply observed him, as if analyzing a puzzle she had already solved. Her fingers curled slightly around the edge of the bench, but her voice remained level. "This is a court of law, Mr. Cole. You will show the proper respect." Cole scoffed, his smirk widening. "Respect? From me?" He tilted his head, letting the moment stretch. "No offense, Your Honor, but respect is something you earn. And you haven't earned a damn thing." The words landed like a slap across the courtroom. Even the bailiff shifted uncomfortably. The lawyers on both sides tensed. The air felt thick, the tension escalating to a breaking point. For a second, a fleeting second, Maya felt the weight of what this moment meant. The cameras, the headlines that would follow. "Defiant billionaire humiliates judge in courtroom standoff." She could already hear the spin, the endless debates on news networks questioning whether she had the authority, the power, to handle a case like this. But she did not falter. She did not flinch. She leaned forward ever so slightly, her eyes locked onto Cole's, with a kind of quiet, simmering intensity that could crack steel. "Bailiff," she said, voice sharp as a blade, "remove Mr. Cole from my courtroom." The room erupted. Gasps, frantic whispers. Lawyers jumped to their feet. The defense team protested loudly, their voices overlapping in a chaotic mess of legal jargon. But Maya didn't waver. She didn't hesitate. She didn't give Cole the chance to turn this into another one of his power games. The bailiffs moved. For the first time, Cole's smirk flickered, a brief crack in the mask. "You can't do that," he barked, his arrogance cracking into something sharper, something more dangerous. "This is a joke." "No, Mr. Cole," Maya said, her voice like iron. "This is a courtroom, and in my courtroom, the law is not a joke." The first bailiff grabbed Cole's arm. He jerked back, yanking his arm free. "Get your hands off me." The second bailiff moved in. Chairs scraped against the floor as security tightened their grip. Cole's suit crumpled as he struggled, his face twisting with rage. "You'll regret this," he shouted, his voice a venomous snarl. "You think this is over? You think you can do this to me? I own this city. I own everything." But it didn't matter. The cameras captured the moment as the once mighty Brandon Cole, the billionaire, the king of Wall Street, was dragged out of the courtroom like a common criminal. His voice echoed, growing fainter, as the doors slammed shut behind him. For a long moment, silence hung over the courtroom. Maya exhaled slowly. She had won this round, but she knew better than to believe the fight was over. No, this was just the beginning. Brandon Cole had spent his entire life untouchable. He had built an empire that made politicians bow, that made entire markets shift at his command. He was the king of high finance, the man who could crush entire corporations with a single phone call. And yet, he had been dragged out of a courtroom like a common criminal. The image of his humiliation was everywhere. News channels replayed the footage on an endless loop. Brandon Cole, the billionaire mastermind, being manhandled by bailiffs, his face contorted in rage, his voice hoarse from screaming threats. The internet devoured the scene. Social media erupted in a frenzy of reactions, some cheering, others stunned that a man of his stature had been treated this way. But inside his private holding cell, Cole was shaking with rage. Not with fear, he didn't know what fear was, but with a deep, uncontrollable fury that burned through his veins like acid. His hands clenched into fists, his breath coming in short bursts as he paced the cramped space. No one had ever humiliated him like this before. He had known this trial would be a battle. He had prepared for it. His legal team had laid the groundwork. His PR machine had been set in motion, ready to spin whatever narrative was needed. But this was a direct attack on his power, and he would not let it stand. The moment his lawyers were allowed to see him, they rushed in, their faces pale with urgency. Jonathan Reeves, his lead attorney, a man who had kept the ultra-rich out of prison for decades, dropped a stack of files onto the metal table. "Brandon," he started, his voice low, measured, "we have a problem." Cole let out a short, humorless laugh. "A problem?" He turned, slamming a fist onto the table, making the documents scatter. His voice was steel-edged, vibrating with barely contained fury. "That woman just turned me into a spectacle." "She's not just a problem," Reeves continued, ignoring the outburst. "She's dangerous, she's smart, and she's just turned public opinion against you." Cole's eyes darkened. He knew how the media worked. He had controlled it for years. He had fed journalists exclusive stories, leaked damaging information about competitors, bent the truth to fit his narrative. The media didn't just report on people like him. It served them. But now it was working against him. The footage of him refusing to stand, of his sneering defiance, was being dissected on every news outlet. The commentators were divided. Was this arrogance, or was it justified? Was Cole making a stand, or was he simply a spoiled, entitled billionaire who thought himself above the law? Some praised Judge Maya Carter, calling her a symbol of integrity, a figure willing to challenge power. Others, however, took a different approach. "She's biased," one anchor stated on a primetime broadcast. "This is an ideological battle. A young black woman overseeing the trial of a wealthy white billionaire. Of course, she wants to make an example out of him." Cole smiled at that. That was the angle he needed. He turned to Reeves, his mind shifting gears, calculating, plotting. "We fight fire with fire," he said. "We take control of the story." Reeves hesitated. "Brandon," Cole cut him off. "We don't just make this about me. We make this about her, a power-hungry, overreaching judge trying to take down a successful businessman. We paint her as someone with a grudge against wealth." His lips curled into a smirk. "And then we watch her burn." Within hours, the narrative had shifted. Major news networks, the ones Cole had bankrolled for years, began running new headlines. Is Judge Maya Carter too biased to oversee this case? Economic discrimination? Billionaire Brandon Cole faces unfair treatment in courtroom clash. Is this really about justice or an attack on the rich? The strategy was simple. Turn the trial into a political and social battlefield. Make people question whether Carter was neutral or if she was punishing success. Paid commentators flooded television screens, dismissing her authority. She's too young, one said on a talk show. Too inexperienced. You put a judge like that in charge of a case this important, and of course she'll make reckless decisions. Another commentator shook his head, speaking with mock concern. This isn't about crime. This is about power, about punishing the successful to satisfy public resentment. And the strategy worked. Online, the attacks grew vicious. Judge Carter's past rulings were dragged into the spotlight, twisted to fit the new narrative. Every case she had ever ruled against a wealthy defendant was now evidence of her supposed bias. Anonymous sources leaked false claims about her anti-corporate stance. Conspiracy theories spread like wildfire. Maya Carter was under siege. In the courtroom, she remained unshaken. She continued the proceedings as though the world wasn't tearing her apart outside those walls. But behind closed doors in her chambers, she saw the headlines. She saw the messages, the death threats, the calls for her removal, the warnings that she would pay for what she did to Cole. She had always known this trial would be a fight, but she hadn't expected this level of war. David Ramirez, her trusted prosecutor, stormed into her office, his face tight with anger. "They're smearing you," he said, dropping a folder on her desk. "They're turning this trial into a damn referendum on you instead of him." Maya stared at the documents. Pages of fabricated scandals, twisted statistics, outright lies. "They want me to back down," she murmured. Ramirez scoffed. "They want you gone." Outside, the public erupted in division. Protests formed, some demanding justice, others demanding Maya step down. The courthouse was surrounded by cameras, reporters asking if she would recuse herself, if she could be impartial, if she would dare to go against the power of a man like Brandon Cole. And inside his penthouse office, watching the chaos unfold on a massive screen, Cole smirked. "See," he said to Reeves, "I told you." Reeves hesitated. "You're winning the media war, Brandon, but the courtroom..." Cole's smirk widened. "She won the first battle," he said. "But now? Now I own the war." His fingers tapped against the glass of his whiskey tumbler as he watched a new headline flash across the screen. "Should Judge Maya Carter be removed?" His victory was within reach. But what Brandon Cole didn't know, what he never saw coming, was that Maya Carter wasn't just fighting for her reputation. She was fighting for justice. And she wasn't done yet. But the threats didn't just come from the media. They became personal. They crept into her life, slipping through the cracks, finding her in the quiet moments when she thought she was alone. And that's when she realized this wasn't just about pressure, this was about fear. The first time her phone rang in the middle of the night, Maya Carter dismissed it as a wrong number. By the third time, she knew better. She sat up in bed, heart pounding as the screen glowed in the darkness. "Unknown caller." Again. She hesitated for half a second, then answered. Silence. A breath. Then a low voice, distorted and grainy, whispered, "Drop the case." A chill ran down her spine. She swallowed, gripping the phone tighter. "Who is this?" Click. The line went dead. Maya exhaled slowly, forcing herself to breathe. This wasn't the first time she had been threatened. As a judge, especially one who had presided over cases against the powerful, she had received her share of hate mail and empty threats. But this was different. This wasn't just anger. It was a warning, and it wouldn't be the last. The next morning, the messages flooded in. Hundreds, emails, texts, social media comments. Some were crude, some were violent, some were terrifyingly specific. "We know where you live. Your career is over, Judge Carter. Walk away while you still can. Accidents happen every day." She deleted some, saved others. She refused to let them shake her. But when she stepped out of her office later that evening, her security detail waiting just outside, she noticed something that made her pause. A black sedan, parked across the street, windows tinted, engine idling. watching. Maya clenched her jaw, squared her shoulders, and walked straight to her car. The sedan didn't follow her. Not that night, but by then she knew. She was being watched. 2 days later, she found the letter. She had been up since dawn, buried in legal documents, trying to stay ahead of Cole's never-ending attempts to twist the narrative in his favor. The courthouse was a war zone of reporters and television crews, each one waiting to see if she would crack under pressure. She wouldn't. She refused. But when she arrived home that evening, stepping onto her porch, something felt off. The night air was still. The street was quiet. And then she saw it. A plain white envelope, tucked into the crack of her front door. Her stomach twisted. Someone had been here. Someone had stood on her porch, close enough to reach her door, close enough to leave a message. Her hands were steady as she tore it open. Inside, on a single sheet of paper, were 4 words. Step down or else. She stared at the words, her heartbeat hammering in her ears. She read them again, slowly, carefully. There was no signature, no mark. Just those 4 words, typed in cold, impersonal black ink. She lifted her gaze, scanning the street, the shadows, the parked cars. Nothing. But that didn't mean they weren't there. Maya inhaled deeply, then stepped inside, locking the door behind her. She placed the letter on the table, staring at it, memorizing it. They wanted her to be afraid. They wanted her to break. Maya Carter had spent her life fighting against men like Brandon Cole. She wasn't stopping now, but Brandon Cole wasn't done. It started subtly, almost too subtly to notice at first. She saw the same black SUV parked across the street from her house every morning. At first, she thought it was a coincidence, but then it appeared again outside the courthouse, then again outside the coffee shop she visited. When she left work late at night, the same vehicle would be parked on the far side of the street, idling, engine running, headlights dimmed. One evening, as she stepped out of a restaurant after a late meeting with Ramirez, she spotted a man leaning against a streetlight, wearing dark glasses even though the sun had long since set. He wasn't looking at his phone, wasn't pretending to wait for someone. He was just standing there, watching. When she locked eyes with him, he didn't flinch, didn't turn away. He just stared, making sure she knew he was there. Her security team had noticed it too. "They aren't being sloppy," one of the guards muttered as they drove her home. "They want you to feel it." She didn't react, didn't let them see how deep the unease settled into her bones. But deep down, she knew. This was psychological warfare. Brandon Cole wanted her to know that no matter where she went, he was watching. And then, the real attack happened. That night, Maya had worked late at the courthouse, sifting through the endless legal motions Cole's team had filed, all designed to stall, to wear her down, to make her question whether this case was even worth it. It was past midnight when she finally left her office, her briefcase heavy with documents, her mind exhausted but focused. The underground parking garage was nearly empty. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering, casting sharp-edged shadows against the concrete floor. As she walked toward her car, something felt wrong. She slowed her pace, her heartbeat suddenly louder in her ears. Then she saw it, a deep, clean slash across the front tire of her car. She stopped cold, her breath caught in her throat. This wasn't random vandalism. This was deliberate, precise, planned. Her pulse quickened as she took a step back, her senses heightened, alert. Then movement in the distance. At the far end of the garage, a figure stood just beyond the glow of the overhead lights, lingering in the darkness. They weren't moving, they weren't running, they were watching her. Maya's breath hitched. She fought against the instinct to freeze, to show fear. Instead, she slowly reached for her phone, keeping her eyes locked on the shadowed figure. As soon as she lifted it, the man turned and walked away, his footsteps slow, deliberate, disappearing into the exit stairwell. Maya's hands curled into fists. This was no longer a warning. They had wanted her to get in that car. They had wanted her driving down the highway when the tire failed. She took a slow, deep breath, forcing her pulse to steady. Then, with cold precision, she dialed her security team. "Lock this place down," she ordered. "No one leaves until we find out who did this." By the next morning, the evidence was undeniable. Her security team had inspected the vehicle, and the report was clear. The tire had been cut in a way that would hold up just long enough before failing at high speed. A manufactured accident. Death trap disguised as bad luck. When Ramirez arrived at her office, he was seething. He didn't sit. He didn't hesitate. He slammed a file down on her desk and looked her straight in the eye. "This isn't just intimidation anymore," he said, his voice rough with anger. "They tried to kill you." Maya didn't respond right away. She already knew. She had known the second she saw the tire, the second she saw the man in the shadows, the second she realized just how far Cole was willing to go. "I have to go public with this," Ramirez pressed. "We need to expose what they're doing." Maya exhaled slowly, then shook her head. "That's exactly what they want," she murmured. She met his eyes, her expression unreadable. "They want me to react. They want me off balance, scared, emotional. They want me to lose control." Ramirez ran a hand through his hair, exasperated. "And what if they try again?" Maya straightened, squared her shoulders, and looked him dead in the eye. "They failed," she said, "and they won't get another chance." That night, as she sat alone in her dimly lit office, she let the weight of everything settle onto her shoulders. This wasn't just a trial anymore. This wasn't about the law. This was a war of power, of control, of survival. And Brandon Cole? He wasn't fighting for a not guilty verdict. He was fighting to ensure she never stood in his way again. Ramirez had said it plainly. He wants you to lose everything. And he had the money, the influence, the ruthlessness to make it happen. Maya closed her eyes for a brief second, then slowly exhaled, letting the fear burn away, leaving only fire behind. Then she opened her eyes, her jaw set like steel. "He thinks he owns the system," she muttered to herself. "That fear always works. That power bends the law to his will." She turned toward the window, staring out at the city below. The city Cole believed belonged to him. He was wrong, because she wasn't going anywhere. She wouldn't just survive this war, she would win it, and she would bring him down on the very battlefield he thought he controlled. Maya Carter had spent weeks enduring threats, surveillance, and sabotage. She had faced an enemy who wielded power like a weapon, who had spent decades buying influence, burying secrets, and crushing anyone who dared stand in his way. Brandon Cole had tried to break her. Now she was going to break him. This wasn't just about winning in court anymore. This was about exposing him for what he truly was, and she knew exactly where to start. Maya's first call was to Ethan Keller, an independent investigator who specialized in financial crimes and corporate corruption. "I need everything," she told him. "Every shell company, every offshore account, every backroom deal that's been swept under the rug." Keller had laughed, low and sharp. "You just declared war on the most powerful man in the country." She didn't hesitate. "He declared war first." Within days, Keller's team had begun sifting through the rot. They followed the money. What they found was a web of corruption so vast it was staggering. Cole had funneled millions through offshore accounts, used front companies to launder illicit funds, and bribed politicians to pass legislation that benefited his empire. The paper trail was damning. Wire transfers to anonymous corporations, secret donations to political figures, bribes disguised as business investments. And then there were the whistleblowers, a former CFO, a disgraced banker, an ex-lobbyist who had helped Cole buy his way out of countless investigations. One by one, they started talking. On record, with receipts. Maya listened to their stories, watching as the pieces fell into place. A pattern of crime, hidden in plain sight, protected by a system designed to shield men like Cole from consequences. But not this time. Not this time. Cole had controlled the narrative for years. He owned journalists, bought networks, fed the press his version of the truth. But there were still independent voices, people who couldn't be bought. And once they had the evidence, they ran with it. At first, it was a trickle, a single expose from a small but credible news outlet, detailing suspicious financial transactions that linked Cole to political bribes. Then a whistleblower interview on an independent podcast, revealing how Cole had orchestrated market manipulations worth billions. Then came the bigger stories, the New York Sentinel, the Washington Post, the Global Journal. Major outlets started running investigations. Inside the billionaire's empire, corruption, bribery, and the man who thought he was untouchable. Leaked documents reveal Brandon Cole's role in political payoffs. From Wall Street king to criminal, the fall of Brandon Cole. The headlines shifted. For the first time, he was losing control of the media, and he knew it. As the reports spread, as the evidence stacked up, Cole's legal team scrambled. They called it a smear campaign. They called it fake news. They threatened lawsuits against every journalist who ran the stories. But it was too late. The investors started pulling out. Stock in Cole Industries plummeted overnight. Politicians who had once rushed to defend him now distanced themselves, refusing to comment. Cole was bleeding power, and Maya wasn't finished. She gathered her team in her office, Ramirez at her side, Keller on the line. "We have everything we need," Keller said. "Cole's empire is crumbling. His people are flipping. If we move now, we can end him." Maya nodded. "This isn't just about bringing him to trial," she said. Her voice was calm, steady, unshaken. "This is about making sure he never has the chance to do this again." Ramirez exhaled, a slow smile forming. "Then let's finish this." Maya Carter had taken everything Cole had thrown at her, and she was still standing. Now she was coming for him. Maya Carter had spent weeks dismantling Brandon Cole's empire. She had exposed his fraud, his bribes, his criminal dealings. She had forced his name onto the front pages for all the wrong reasons. The world was finally seeing him for what he truly was. A man who had built his fortune on lies and corruption. And now he wanted to meet. It was a trap. She knew that. But Maya wasn't afraid. If Cole thought she would back down, he was dead wrong. The meeting was arranged through his lawyers, framed as an off-the-record discussion. They didn't meet in his office. Too public. Not at the courthouse. Too risky. Instead, it was set in a private suite at a five-star hotel, high above the city, where Cole could still pretend he was in control. Maya stepped out of the elevator, her heels clicking against the polished marble floors. Her expression unreadable. Her security detail had wanted to come. She had refused. This was between her and Cole. When she entered the suite, he was already waiting, seated in a plush leather chair by the floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his smile dripping with arrogance. She didn't sit, didn't offer pleasantries. She simply crossed her arms, meeting his gaze with cold, unwavering focus. "Well," Cole drawled, swirling the amber liquid in his glass, "you actually came." Maya's lips curled into a faint, humorless smile. "I was curious," Cole chuckled, shaking his head. "You know," he mused, "I've seen plenty of people try to come after me. Prosecutors, regulators, politicians. People who thought they had the power to bring me down." He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with amusement. "None of them succeeded." Maya didn't blink. "You've never faced someone like me." Cole's smirk widened. "That's cute," he said, "but let's not pretend you actually believe you can win." He set his drink down, then stood, walking toward her with slow, deliberate steps. "You think this is about the law? About justice?" He laughed, shaking his head. "This is about power, Judge Carter, and I own power. I always have." He stopped just a few feet away, looking her up and down like she was nothing more than an inconvenience to be swatted away. Maya held his gaze, refusing to move, refusing to show even a flicker of doubt. Cole exhaled dramatically. "So let's cut to the chase. I'm giving you a chance to walk away." His voice lowered as if offering some great favor. "Drop the case, call off your dogs. Stop this little crusade before it gets messy." He tilted his head, smiling like the devil himself. "And in return, I let you keep your career. I let you walk away with your name intact. No harm, no foul." Maya let the silence stretch between them. Then she stepped closer, closing the distance until she could see the confidence in his eyes, the certainty that he had already won. And then she smiled, a slow, knowing, merciless smile. "No." Cole blinked. Maya leaned in, her voice steady, cold as steel. "I'm not walking away." His smirk faltered, just for a second. "I'm going to bury you," she continued. "Not in secret, not in the shadows, but in front of the entire world. She took another step forward. I'm going to rip apart everything you've built, expose everything you've done, and make sure there isn't a single person left who doesn't know exactly who you are. Cole's jaw clenched. You think you can take me down? He scoffed. You think some headlines in a courtroom are enough? Maya tilted her head. I don't think, she said smoothly. I know. The room went dead silent. Cole stared at her, the realization sinking in that she wasn't bluffing. Maya let the moment hang, let him feel it. The shift of power, the fact that for the first time, he was on the losing end. Then she stepped past him, heading for the door. Just before she left, she turned back. You wanted to know if I thought I could take you down. She smiled again, just enough to make him furious. Watch me. And with that, she walked out, leaving Brandon Cole standing there for the first time in his life, realizing that he was truly afraid. The fight for justice is just beginning. More shocking twists are ahead. Don't miss a moment. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to stay with us. Thank you for standing for truth and justice. Where are you watching from? Let us know. Brandon Cole had faced setbacks before, but he was not a man who accepted defeat. With his empire crumbling and his reputation unraveling in front of the world, he reached for his last, most desperate move. He hired Richard Calloway, a notorious lawyer known throughout the country as the one who specialized in salvaging lost causes. Calloway wasn't just a good lawyer. He was ruthless, known for bending the rules until they nearly broke, pulling courtroom theatrics that turned even hopeless cases into stunning victories. When Calloway entered the courtroom, the entire atmosphere shifted. Tall, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, he strode toward the defense table as though he already owned the place. Brandon Cole sat quietly next to him, his expression cold and controlled, a faint, smug smile playing at his lips. Maya watched carefully from her seat at the bench, sensing immediately that this was no ordinary legal challenge. As Calloway stood to speak, every eye in the courtroom turned to him. He placed a thick folder dramatically on the table, making a calculated pause before looking directly up at Maya. Your Honor, Calloway began smoothly, his voice like silk, laced with deliberate, theatrical concern. We must address a matter of utmost urgency, one concerning the integrity of this very court. The spectators murmured, a ripple of confusion spreading through the room. Maya steadied herself, her heartbeat quickening slightly. She had expected tricks, delays, and distractions, but the way Calloway spoke signified something far more sinister. Calloway opened the folder, pulling out printed pages, holding them up in full view of the courtroom. These emails, he continued, raising his voice, recently came into our possession. They clearly indicate a conflict of interest involving Judge Maya Carter. The courtroom erupted into shocked whispers. Maya felt the sudden, sharp sting of unfairness tightening in her chest, but she showed no reaction. She simply narrowed her eyes, watching as Calloway laid out his carefully orchestrated attack. These communications, he continued, pacing slowly in front of the jury, suggest that Judge Carter has engaged in secret discussions regarding Mr. Cole's case. Communications that clearly demonstrate bias, favoritism, and an intent to manipulate this trial to fulfill a personal agenda. He spun toward Maya, eyes narrowed, his voice dropping dangerously low. Given the gravity of this evidence, we have no choice but to demand that Judge Carter recuse herself immediately in the interest of justice and fairness. The courtroom exploded into chaos. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras flashed, the jury shifted uncomfortably, clearly shaken by the sudden turn of events. Maya kept her composure, her hands gripping the edge of the bench tightly, refusing to show the deep anger simmering beneath her calm exterior. David Ramirez rose swiftly to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. These claims are entirely baseless, fabricated to undermine the court's credibility. Baseless? Calloway sneered, cutting him off sharply. He waved the emails in Ramirez's direction. These are Judge Carter's own words, her private exchanges. We're not inventing this. Ramirez's voice trembled with barely suppressed rage. You're twisting facts to protect your client, Calloway. This is a deliberate attempt to sabotage the trial. Calloway smiled coolly, unfazed. The evidence speaks for itself, counselor. All eyes turned back to Maya. She felt the immense pressure bearing down on her, the crushing weight of the lies and manipulation Calloway had so masterfully presented. She knew these emails were fake. She'd never seen them before, never typed those hateful words, never exchanged hidden messages about Brandon Cole. But now the entire room was staring at her, doubt flickering across their faces. Cole had turned this trial into a spectacle, and now Calloway had poured gasoline onto the fire. "Order!" Maya finally called, her voice cutting sharply through the chaos. "I will have order in this courtroom." Gradually, silence returned, but the tension remained thick, oppressive, nearly suffocating. Maya stood slowly, locking eyes with Calloway, daring him to break eye contact first. He didn't. "Mr. Calloway," she began coldly, her voice steady and clear, "your accusations are serious, and I take them seriously. But understand this, mere accusations, especially ones conveniently emerging mid-trial, do not automatically prove guilt. These emails, whatever their supposed origin, will undergo careful examination before I take any further action." Calloway opened his mouth to protest, but Maya raised her hand sharply, silencing him immediately. "Until then, I will remain the judge presiding over this case. Your motion for immediate recusal is denied." Gasps filled the room. Calloway's face darkened in fury. Brandon Cole's composed expression faltered momentarily, replaced briefly by raw anger. Maya refused to look away from either man, her gaze unwavering, defiant, resolute. "You're making a mistake, Judge Carter," Calloway said, barely controlling his anger. Maya shook her head, calmness masking the intensity behind her words. "No, Mr. Calloway. The mistake would be allowing you and your client to derail justice with false accusations. I promised fairness. I promised integrity. I will not abandon those promises now." Calloway's jaw tightened visibly, realizing he had underestimated her resolve. The jury watched carefully, some clearly confused, others visibly moved by Maya's firm response. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what came next. Maya stood tall, her voice projecting confidence even as inside, her heart pounded wildly. "This court stands adjourned until tomorrow morning. By then we will investigate the origin of these emails. Until then, no further interruptions will be tolerated." She slammed the gavel down with authority, its sharp sound echoing powerfully through the chamber. Slowly the courtroom emptied, reporters rushing to break the story, spectators murmuring in disbelief. Maya remained behind, sitting down slowly, trying to steady her trembling hands beneath the bench. Ramirez approached cautiously. "They're playing dirty now," he whispered, voice tense. "We both know those emails are fake, but the damage is already done. The jury's shaken." Maya nodded, her expression hardening. "Cole thinks this stunt will break me, force me to step down. He couldn't be more wrong. I'm not going anywhere." She stood again, straightening her robes, eyes burning with determination. "If he wants to fight dirty, then we'll fight him back, but we'll fight with the truth." Ramirez nodded slowly, recognizing the fire in her eyes. "Then let's get to work." Outside, cameras flashed, the public debated, and doubt hung thick in the air. But inside Maya Carter, a calm storm gathered strength. She had survived threats, surveillance, sabotage, and now character assassination. She'd come too far to retreat. Brandon Cole had escalated this battle to a level of injustice she could no longer ignore. Now she would face him directly, head-on, exposing every lie, every crime, every twisted attempt at corruption. Cole had tried everything to stop her, but all he'd done was make her resolve even stronger. Now it was her turn to strike back, not quietly, but boldly, publicly, and without mercy. She would see this through to the end, no matter what it took. The courtroom battle had escalated into all-out war. Brandon Cole and Richard Calloway had thrown everything at Maya Carter. False accusations, media pressure, manufactured scandals, all designed to break her, to force her off the case before she could bring Cole to justice. But Maya hadn't backed down. And now, as the next session began, Cole and Calloway were ready to strike again. The courthouse was under siege. Before sunrise, waves of reporters swarmed the steps, their cameras flashing, microphones raised, eager to capture the next chapter of the trial that had gripped the nation. News vans lined the streets, commentators debated outside, and opinion pieces flooded every major outlet. Inside, Maya Carter sat tall at the bench, but she could feel the intensified scrutiny pressing down on her. Every move she made, every word she spoke was being dissected in real time by the court of public opinion. The pressure was suffocating, and Brandon Cole knew it. Across the room, Cole sat at the defense table, his hands folded, his expression cool, his arrogance still intact. Beside him, Richard Calloway stood, his infamous shark-like grin firmly in place. He stood up, Calloway began, rising smoothly, his voice dripping with false concern. As much as we respect the court's previous rulings, we cannot ignore the growing body of evidence that calls into question your ability to oversee this case fairly. Maya barely blinked. Here we go again. Calloway walked slowly toward the jury, his posture one of controlled confidence. Just yesterday, new documents were brought to our attention. These records indicate that Judge Carter has had prior dealings with individuals who have publicly opposed my client's business ventures. A murmur swept through the courtroom. The jury shifted uncomfortably. The press in the back leaned forward, hungry for scandal. We are forced to renew our request for your recusal, Calloway said, turning back to face her. His smile was razor sharp. For the sake of true justice. Maya's fingers curled against the wood of her bench. She expected this. The relentless accusations, the manufactured evidence, the attempt to drown her under a tidal wave of doubt. But before she could respond, David Ramirez shot to his feet. Enough, he snapped, slamming a thick folder onto the prosecution's table. Calloway paused, his smug expression faltering for a fraction of a second. Ramirez wasn't done. Your Honor, he said, turning to face the courtroom. Before we entertain yet another baseless accusation, I'd like to remind this court exactly who we're dealing with. He strode toward the jury, flipping open the folder. Richard Calloway has been here before. In fact, he has built his entire career on getting billionaires off the hook by attacking the judges presiding over their cases. The room stilled. Ramirez continued, his voice clear, deliberate, and cutting like a blade. 5 years ago, in the case of Donovan versus State, Calloway submitted fabricated correspondence to have a presiding judge removed. He did the same in Martinez versus U.S. and again in Vanguard versus SEC. In every instance, he used false evidence, created distractions, and manipulated the court, all in service of the wealthy criminals he defends. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Calloway's jaw tightened ever so slightly. Ramirez turned, eyes burning with determination. And now he's doing it again. A tense silence hung in the air. Maya leaned forward. Mr. Calloway, do you have a response to these allegations? Calloway straightened his jacket, forcing a smirk. It's not a crime to defend one's clients, Your Honor. But it is a crime to fabricate evidence, Ramirez shot back immediately. Maya let that statement settle before she spoke. If this is an orchestrated attempt to manipulate this trial, she said, her voice steady, I will expose it. Every lie, every forged document, every attempt to derail justice. Calloway held his composure, but something flickered behind his eyes. Uncertainty. For the first time, Cole shifted in his seat. And then the final blow came. Ramirez turned to the screen behind him. Ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about what Mr. Cole doesn't want you to see. The lights dimmed and a series of images appeared on the screen. Bank transactions, wire transfers, emails. These, Ramirez said, stepping aside, are records showing Brandon Cole's history of bribing officials, influencing regulatory boards, and paying off politicians. A stunned hush fell over the courtroom. Maya watched as Cole's mask cracked. His jaw clenched. His fingers twitched against the table. For the first time, he looked uneasy. The once untouchable billionaire was now a man cornered, and Maya Carter was going to make sure he never escaped. The tension in the courtroom had reached a boiling point. The battle between Maya Carter and Brandon Cole had escalated beyond legal arguments. This was a war of power, manipulation, and survival. The air was thick with anticipation as Maya sat firmly at the bench, eyes locked on the defense table where Cole and his attack dog, Richard Calloway, sat. Cole's usual smug confidence was now a thin veneer, barely hiding the cracks forming beneath the weight of the damning evidence Ramirez had exposed. And then, bang! A single gunshot ripped through the tense silence. For a split second, everything froze. Then chaos. Screams erupted. Chairs screeched against the floor as people ducked, ran, shoved past one another in terror. Papers scattered. Reporters scrambled for cover, and jurors instinctively shielded themselves. Maya's heart pounded violently, but she didn't move. She couldn't afford to. Security sprung into action, guns drawn as they rushed to secure the room. The bailiffs pushed Cole and Calloway back, forcing them against the defense table, while armed officers flooded through the doors. "Everyone, stay down!" one of the officers shouted. Maya's grip on the bench tightened as she scanned the room, searching for the source of the gunfire. And then she saw him, a man near the back of the courtroom, his hands trembling, the smoking gun still clutched in his grip. He wasn't some random assailant. Maya's stomach dropped. She recognized him. He was one of Cole's men. Within minutes, officers had subdued the shooter, wrestled him to the ground, cuffed him, and dragged him out of the courtroom. Outside, the media had already caught wind of the chaos. Cameras flashed wildly as reporters screamed for answers, their voices a frantic blur of speculation and urgency. Inside, security officers locked down the courtroom. People were shaken, but the immediate threat had been neutralized. Maya slowly rose from her seat, eyes flickering toward Cole. For the first time, he wasn't smirking. Instead, he sat stone-faced, his jaw clenched, his fingers steepled together. A muscle in his cheek twitched. This wasn't part of his plan. Or was it? Maya took a slow breath, steadying herself. Then an officer approached, his radio still crackling with frantic updates. He leaned in, voice low but urgent. "Judge Carter, we've confirmed the shooter's identity." Maya had already guessed, but hearing it confirmed sent a slow wave of cold anger washing through her. "He's a known associate of Brandon Cole," the officer continued, "tied to his private security firm. Financial records show he's been on Cole's payroll for years." Maya turned her gaze back to Cole, and then she saw it. It was quick, a flicker of irritation, the briefest sign of frustration beneath his carefully constructed mask. He didn't look surprised that the shooter had ties to him. He looked annoyed that it had been discovered so quickly. Calloway was already on his feet, adjusting his suit as if the chaos of the last 10 minutes hadn't happened. "Your Honor," he began smoothly, his voice as poised as ever. "In light of this unfortunate event, I suggest we adjourn immediately for the safety of everyone involved." Maya narrowed her eyes. Of course, they wanted to shut down the trial, to twist the narrative, to use this deliberate act of violence as an excuse to derail everything. She knew exactly what would happen next. The media would spin it, the defense would argue that Cole was being targeted unfairly, that the courtroom was no longer safe, anything to delay the inevitable. Maya would not let that happen. She straightened her posture, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "This trial," she said coldly, "will not be derailed by a calculated attempt to create chaos." Calloway blinked. He hadn't expected her to regain control so quickly. Maya continued, her voice unwavering. "I want a full investigation into today's incident. Every security camera, every financial transaction tied to the shooter. I want it all reviewed, immediately." She turned her gaze toward Cole, challenging him. "If this was an attempt to intimidate this court, let me be very clear. It has failed." The jury was still shaken, but now they weren't just afraid. They were angry. At first, some of them had doubted Maya's claims that Cole had used corruption and manipulation to bend the system to his will. Now they had seen it for themselves. For the first time, Cole looked truly unsettled. This was not the kind of attention he wanted. He had spent his entire career controlling situations from behind the scenes, never getting his hands dirty. But now his fingerprints were all over this. The shooter would talk. The financial records would lead back to him, and the world would watch as the truth unraveled. Maya leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice just enough that only Cole could hear. "Was this your last desperate trick?" she asked. her tone sharp as a knife. Because if so, you just made the biggest mistake of your life. Cole's jaw tightened. For the first time, he had no comeback. As Maya slammed the gavel down, the courtroom was still buzzing with the shock of what had just transpired. Outside, the media would soon be scrambling to report the truth that the shooting wasn't random, that it wasn't a coincidence, that Cole's shadowy influence had just stepped into the spotlight for all to see. He had tried every dirty trick in the book, and now his empire was starting to collapse. Maya Carter had survived everything he had thrown at her. Now, it was her turn to strike back. The tension inside the courtroom was suffocating. Every breath, every movement, every flicker of doubt hung in the air like a storm ready to break. The trial had been a battlefield, and now the war was about to end. Maya Carter sat tall at the bench, her face an impenetrable mask of control. Across the room, Brandon Cole's once unshakable confidence had thinned to a brittle edge, his fingers tapping a slow, restless rhythm against the table. Beside him, Richard Calloway, ever the composed strategist, whispered something under his breath. But even he couldn't mask the tension tightening in his jaw. Then, David Ramirez stood. The lead prosecutor moved with absolute certainty, his expression set in stone as he strode to the center of the courtroom. He carried a single folder, thinner than the stacks of documents they had gone through in previous hearings. But this was different. This was the endgame. Ramirez placed the folder on the table before him and looked up. His voice was calm, deliberate, but sharp enough to cut through the silence. "Your Honor," he began, turning to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is it." A ripple of unease spread through the room. Cole shifted in his seat, his fingers tightening against the table, his jaw flexing. "For weeks you have heard the evidence," Ramirez continued, pacing slowly. "You have seen the lengths to which Mr. Cole has gone to manipulate, intimidate, and outright buy his way out of justice." He turned, his gaze locking onto the jury members. "But now, I give you the final piece. The proof, the undeniable, indisputable truth that Brandon Cole is guilty." The courtroom held its breath. Ramirez reached into the folder, pulled out a single sheet of paper, and held it up for the court to see. "This," he said, "is a signed affidavit from a former Cole Industries accountant. Someone who worked inside his financial empire for over a decade. Someone who was responsible for covering up his crimes. Someone who, today, has chosen to come forward." Cole's entire body stiffened. Calloway sat frozen, his lips pressed into a thin, colorless line. Ramirez didn't stop. "This document," he continued, holding it high, "contains a full confession detailing how Cole funneled millions in illegal funds through offshore accounts. It exposes his bribes, his fraudulent business dealings, every single dirty secret he thought would never see the light of day." A wave of shocked murmurs spread through the room. Reporters in the back scrambled for their phones, typing furiously. Ramirez let it sink in, and then he delivered the final strike. "But that's not all." He turned back to the screen behind him. "We also have the bank records, the transactions, the payoffs, the signatures, and if anyone still doubts the truth..." He clicked a remote, and the screen flickered to life. A video appeared, a grainy black and white security feed from an upscale office, the timestamp barely a year old. In the footage, Brandon Cole himself sat behind a desk. He leaned forward, his voice crisp and clear over the recording. "This is how it works," he said, exhaling slowly, his tone dripping with arrogance. "I pay, they listen, and if they don't, they disappear." The words hit like a sledgehammer. The jury's reaction was instant, eyes wide, backs straight, hands gripping the armrests of their chairs. Cole's mask shattered. His composure cracked into something raw, something dangerous. His fingers dug into the table, his breathing sharp and uneven. For the first time, the illusion of control was gone. Calloway, ever the tactician, stood abruptly. "Your Honor, this is highly prejudicial," he said. Maya lifted a single hand, cutting him off. "Sit down, Mr. Calloway." Calloway's mouth pressed into a tight line, but he obeyed. Maya turned to the jury. "You may proceed with deliberation." The jury foreman nodded, his face unreadable. We won't need long, Your Honor, Maya gestured. Then proceed. The courtroom buzzed as the jury stood and exited the room. Reporters whispered frantically, their fingers flying across their keyboards, headlines already forming. Brandon Cole sat motionless, his once powerful empire now reduced to the few precious moments before his fate was sealed. It took less than 20 minutes. When the jury re-entered, the room fell into absolute silence. Foreman, a middle-aged man with deep lines carved into his face, and stood slowly. He didn't glance at Cole. He didn't hesitate. On the charge of fraud, we find the defendant guilty. The first blow landed. On the charge of bribery, we find the defendant guilty. Cole's hands balled into fists. On the charge of obstruction of justice, we find the defendant guilty. A low gasp rippled through the gallery. And on the charge of conspiracy, we find the defendant guilty. The room erupted. Maya slammed her gavel down. Order! But there was no stopping it now. The press had already broken loose, flashing cameras, reporters scrambling to get the verdict out. Brandon Cole, the untouchable billionaire, was guilty on all counts. Maya took a slow breath, then turned to the defendant's table. Mr. Cole, she said, her voice even, powerful, unwavering. You have been found guilty of multiple felonies. Your sentencing hearing will be scheduled within the next 2 weeks. Until then, you will remain in federal custody. Cole's chest rose and fell sharply, his fury barely contained. His entire world, his empire, his control, his power was gone. He turned, eyes burning, and locked onto Maya. This isn't over, he hissed. Maya didn't flinch. Yes, Mr. Cole, she said coldly. It is. With that, the bailiffs moved in, snapping handcuffs around his wrists. As they led him away, the once mighty titan of industry no longer looked like a man above the law. He looked like what he had always been, a criminal. Maya watched as they dragged him through the doors, then slowly turned back to face the courtroom. She had won. But this wasn't just about her. This was about every person Brandon Cole had ever silenced, ever exploited, ever crushed under his weight. Justice had finally caught up to him, and the world had watched it happen. Maya Carter stepped out of the courthouse into a storm of flashing lights, roaring voices, and a sea of people. The air was electric. Reporters pushed forward, microphones raised, shouting questions that blended into a deafening blur. Cameras flashed relentlessly, illuminating her in bursts of white-hot light. But beyond the media frenzy, the sound that truly mattered rang through the streets, the people cheering. Maya, Maya, Maya! A crowd had gathered outside the courthouse steps, thousands of voices merging into one, chanting her name. Some held signs, "Justice wins. No one is above the law, Brandon Cole. Guilty." While others simply clapped, whistled, and roared in triumph. She had won. But as Maya descended the steps, her expression remained measured, steady, victorious but not celebratory. Because this wasn't just about winning a case. This was about surviving a war. She reached the final step and paused, scanning the crowd. For months, she had endured everything: threats, manipulation, attacks on her character, on her life. Brandon Cole had thrown every weapon in his arsenal at her. And yet here she stood. She turned slightly, catching sight of David Ramirez, standing off to the side, watching with quiet pride. He gave her a small nod. They had done it, but they both knew this wasn't the end of the fight. Maya turned toward the microphones, facing the press that had hounded her, doubted her, twisted her story. Now they were hanging on her every word. A journalist from National Daily was the first to break the silence. Judge Carter, what does this verdict mean for the future of corporate corruption cases? Maya exhaled slowly. The verdict today, she said, her voice clear, unshaken, is more than just about one man. It's about a system that has, for far too long, allowed wealth and power to rewrite the definition of justice. A murmur rippled through the crowd, but no one interrupted. For years, Brandon Cole believed he was untouchable. He believed that money, connections, and influence could shield him from the consequences of his actions. She let those words sink in. But today, she continued, her voice growing stronger, this courtroom, The law proved him wrong. More cheers erupted from the crowd, but Maya wasn't finished. She let her eyes scan across the sea of cameras, searching beyond the flashing lights, speaking to everyone watching on TV, on their phones, in their homes. She had spent her career fighting for justice, but now she saw it clearly for what it was. Justice wasn't just blind. It was bought, threatened, beaten, and twisted until someone fought hard enough to make it mean something again. This trial had exposed the cracks in the system, and she knew Cole was just one of many. She squared her shoulders, leaned slightly toward the microphones, and said the words that would echo beyond this moment, beyond this case, beyond this courtroom. No one is above the law. No one can trample over justice. The cameras flashed in unison. It was the headline they had been waiting for. But for Maya, it wasn't just words. It was a warning. To every man like Brandon Cole. To every corrupt figure who thought they were untouchable. To every person who thought they could bend justice until it broke. Not anymore. The questions continued to fly, but Maya didn't answer. She turned away from the podium, stepping toward her waiting car, leaving the media to do what they did best. Spin the story into history. She climbed into the back seat, exhaling for the first time since the verdict. As the car pulled away, the chants of the crowd still rang in the air. But Maya knew this victory came with a cost. She had seen the face of power. She had seen how far it was willing to go. And she knew this wasn't the last time she would have to fight. She glanced at Ramirez, who sat beside her. "We made history today," he said. Maya nodded. "For now." Because justice was never permanent. It was a war that had to be fought again and again. And Maya Carter? She was ready. Maya Carter's battle against Brandon Cole was never just about one trial. It was never just about one corrupt billionaire, one courtroom, or one verdict. This was about something bigger, a fight that extends beyond the walls of justice, beyond the legal system, and into the heart of society itself. It was about power, who has it, who abuses it, and who has the courage to stand against it. For years, men like Brandon Cole had manipulated the system, using money and influence to escape the consequences of their actions. They bought their way out of accountability, bribed their way into protection, and used their status to crush anyone who dared oppose them. But Maya Carter refused to be crushed. She stood her ground, knowing that the odds were against her. She faced lies, threats, intimidation, and even attempts on her life, all because she dared to do what so many before her had been too afraid to attempt. She proved that justice is not just for the privileged, that laws should not bend to wealth, that no one is above the law. But here's the reality. Justice is not automatic. Justice is not a given. Justice is fought for. For every case like Brandon Cole's that makes headlines, there are 1,000 more hidden behind closed doors, cases where money wins and truth is buried. And this story, as satisfying as it may seem, is not just fiction. It's a reflection of reality. Powerful people get away with corruption every single day because the system is designed to protect them, unless someone like Maya Carter chooses to fight back. And even when someone does, the system fights back harder. This story isn't just about justice winning. It's about how close justice came to being destroyed. It's about how much Maya had to sacrifice just to make the truth heard. And it's about how easily this could have ended differently. If she had been weaker, if the jury had been swayed, if the media had fully turned against her. That's the lesson we must take away. If we want justice in the real world, we can't just hope for it. We must demand it. We must call out corruption when we see it. We must support those who fight for what's right, even when the odds are against them. Because if we don't, people like Brandon Cole will win again and again and again. Maya Carter didn't back down. Now neither can we. If this story resonated with you, if it made you angry, if it made you think, then don't let the conversation end here. Like this video if you believe justice should never be for sale. Subscribe to this channel if you want more stories that expose the truth about power and corruption. Share this video to spread the message, because the more people who understand the reality of injustice, the harder it becomes for the corrupt to hide. This isn't just a story, this is a wake-up call. Are you listening?